How's your Mercury retrograde going? I'll go first. Mine has been rough. At the time that I am recording this, we are 1 day away from Mercury going direct. When you are going to be listening to it, we'll be about a week into that, which is considered by some to be the shadow phase. People consider it a week to 2 weeks after and before the retrograde, that you still have kind of residual effects. But as of the time of this recording, we are 1 day away from Mercury going direct, and I have never been more ready for it. I am the kind of person that carries moldavite, or wears moldavite during Mercury retrograde, because I know that if I don't embrace the shadow work that is being presented to me, that it's just going to be worse for me. So I run into it headlong and embrace it fully, which means that it's just really uncomfortable for me every time, because that's what shadow work is. But I would rather deal with the discomfort of working through the shadow than deal with the repeated patterns that come with not dealing with the shadow. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Naomi, and this is Mosaic in Progress. And we are not talking about Mercury retrograde on this podcast today, but we are going to talk about some of the themes that have come up for me during this Mercury retrograde. Before we get into that, last week before last maybe, I made a recommendation to listen or follow my sister on Substack, and follow her writings there. And I want to make another recommendation today, a podcast that has absolutely nothing to do with the topic of my podcast today or any of the stuff that I go into in my podcast. It's called The Leadership Sisterhood, and it's a podcast by two women who work in business management positions. And one of them I knew from back in the days that I was going to church. And I have been listening to it religiously since it came out. And as someone in a new managerial position, it has been super helpful to me in just structuring how I deal with my job and the employees that I work with. And I've implemented a lot of their tips and strategies, and it has made a world of difference. I am seeing just such growth in our agency and growth in the employees individually, and I highly recommend it. So go listen to the Leadership Sisterhood if you are in a managerial position, a supervisory position, or you're a woman working in a corporate type world. Just go listen to it. I feel like a lot of their tips can translate to other areas that aren't just being a manager in business. Because there's a lot of stuff about just like managing yourself and dealing with people and dealing with difficult situations. But it's one of my new favorite podcasts, and you should go listen to it. And that's not what we're talking about today, but I wanted to give them a little plug because I think they're awesome and they're new and they're working really hard at their podcast, and you should go listen to them. One of the things that I have really struggled with in the current political environment is the phrase, it's not left versus right, it's top versus down. And I know I've said that. I think I've said it on this podcast. And I struggle with it every time I say it and every time I hear it, because as soon as I hear it from myself or anyone else, I go, that's not quite right. And the past week, I kind of had an epiphany about it. and realized why it just doesn't resonate with me, because it's so close to being accurate, but it's not. Because the thing is, while yes, in a sense, it is top versus down, because the elite, the wealthy, those who have the power and the money are suppressing those that don't, and they don't give a fuck whether you agree with them or not. They'll hurt you whether you voted for them or not. They're not on the side of those who are on their side. They're on their own side. And you can see that playing out, and you look at their base of support and you're like, why are you supporting someone who's so against you, who wants to take your money, who wants to take your power, who wants to take your autonomy, who wants to make you their slaves, essentially? And I can't remember which specific thing gave me that epiphany where I realized it. But this is an ideological war, and not a left versus right ideological war, though one side is falling more on one side than the other. This is individual versus collective. This is a philosophical, fundamental difference of belief. Because in all logical reasoning, there should be no reason that the MAGA base should exist. Because Donald Trump and Elon Musk and all of the cronies of Donald Trump and Elon Musk are fucking over everyone who supports them. You look at the MAGA base, you're looking at rural people who have poor education. For the most part. I'm not saying all of them, but the majority of their base comes from rural areas with poorly funded educational systems. These are not billionaires. These are not even millionaires. They're not 100,000aires. These are people who are barely making it. These are people who should, for all logic and purposes, be opposed to him and everything that he stands for. But they have something in common, and that is the belief in individualism. The pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, which, let's be very clear about that. The phrase pull yourself up by your bootstraps was meant, the intention behind it was to say you're stupid if you think you can do that. No one can do that. You can't pull your own self up by your bootstraps, and if you think you can, you're stupid. That was the intention behind the expression, was to say no one can do that. You can't pull your own self up. You have to have help. And somehow it became a rally cry of individualism, of just pull your own self up by your bootstraps. Which is an impossibility, and it always has been. I was raised in individualistic mentality, that your own individual rights are more important than the collective. And that's true to a degree, and it's not true to a degree. It is true depending on circumstance. And I think that so much of politics and religion and philosophy is lost because we think in black and white terms. It's either this way or that way, and there's no in between, and it's either one is either truth or the other is false. But that's not always the case. Sometimes something is true in one instance and not in another. Individual rights are important. Absolutely. Freedom is important. Absolutely. I don't discount that in any way. I don't dismiss it in any way. But when you decide to live in a society, as we are, there has to be a compromise. When I married my husband and moved in with him, I had to make certain compromises. I had to adjust certain things about what I did, and he as well had to do the same. This does not mean that we gave up our rights or that we became less free in the sense of it was stolen from us. We intentionally gave up that freedom because we decided that the collaboration and the cooperation of living together and building a life together was more beneficial than doing it on our own. And we recognized that in doing that, we had to give up some of our freedoms. That doesn't mean that we're oppressed. It doesn't mean that we're slaves. It means that we decided to cooperate and collaborate on living life for our mutual benefit. And that involved giving up some freedom. And we calculated that and decided giving up that freedom was worth it for the benefit of the cooperative exchange. That is what living in society is. If you decide to participate in society, you want to live in society, you want to have the benefits of society, you have to give up some individual freedoms. It took me until my late 30s to realize the fullness of this statement, but that is the reality of living in society. You cannot live in society and hold on to your individual freedoms and liberties like your life depends on it and expect to be a part of society. If you want to be absolutely totally free and no one ever tells you what to do or expects anything of you, go live in the woods. I've said this on podcasts before. I'm saying it again. If you are that wed to your individual freedoms and liberties that you can't stand for someone to say, hey, maybe you should drive on this side of the road instead of that side of the road, go live in the woods. If you cannot get out of the selfish mentality that no one should ever tell you what to do, and that you shouldn't have to adjust anything about your life for anyone else, then go live in the woods. But what we are experiencing right now is those who have the stubborn, individualistic mentality insisting that they be allowed to participate in society without actually making any of the compromises or collaborations necessary to live in society. If you don't want to get a vaccine of that would protect you and others against an infectious disease that is eradicating large portions of the population, then don't do it. It's your body. Don't do it. But don't expect to be allowed around others who are vulnerable to that virus because you chose not to meet the requirements of living in society. We all recognize this with bathing, except for a small faction of outliers. Like, it is expected and understood that you should bathe semi-regularly if you are going out in society for hygienic purposes and for the fact that you don't want to smell and inconvenience everyone with the fact that you reek. But for some reason, we can't translate that into other things. For some reason, taking a vaccine for herd immunity so that since we live in tight quarters and we're all in collaborative effort, that we don't all get each other sick, that's just asking too much, and that's just an intrusion on your rights. Masks, that's another thing. And I'm speaking specifically to health things right now, but let's get a little deeper. Pooling our money to make sure that we have a standard for our children of education so that they can also participate in society. They can find jobs and go out to the world and all have the same base level of education. Pulling money together so that those who are working for extremely greedy corporations who decide that they don't need to pay their workers a living wage so that they can afford food and healthcare and basic necessities, and that we all just collaborate together and help them out so that they can eat and have clothes and things like that. And those with an individualistic mindset look at them as leeches on society. But this is part of society. This is how society works. We collaborate and we cooperate and we work together so that we can all have a better life. And as I was working through this and thinking about it and examining the mentality of it, it really hit me that this is a collective solar plexus chakra wound, and it's so ironic that that comes up at the time that Mercury retrograde is showing me my solar plexus wound personally. We have a collective wounding, and I think we have a collective wounding of multiple chakras. Like, we have dealt, maybe throughout our whole history, but certainly in recent history, with this collective wounding of very basic things about what humanity is. And no one is addressing it in any kind of way to heal the collective. When you reach that adolescent period, you are working on developing that solar plexus energy, that personal power, which involves accountability, which involves responsibility, and it also involves autonomy. And those who never achieved that tend toward more individualistic mentality because they are trying so hard to get the autonomy that they've never had. In Christianity and in Judaism and probably other religions and traditions that I don't know about, 12-ish years old is considered the age of accountability, which is about the beginning of adolescence. And the age of accountability is when you're considered, for spiritual purposes, an adult. Not really for other things, but as far as taking responsibility for your own actions, you're your own person at that point. No one has to answer for you. You are the one who answers for yourself. And I don't know how other people were raised and how it was dealt with, but for myself personally, this was not empowering for me at all. I've mentioned before that I was raised in the Church of Christ, and I was 7 years old when I asked to be baptized. And that was when my dad was still preaching in churches before he had been kicked out of all of them. And I went down front at the invitation call, and I said I wanted to be baptized, and he asked why, and I said, 'cause I've sinned. And he asked what I'd done that was sin. And I said I fight with my sister when I'm not supposed to. I got beat for it, so it felt, made sense to me. That's a sin. And he got up in front of the congregation and said, we should all be more like Naomi, more willing to repent. And did not let me be baptized because he said I didn't truly understand right from wrong. I mean, apparently enough to be abused for it, but not enough for me to take the responsibility for myself and save myself. And the years went on, and when I was 10 years old, after one of our Sunday services, my dad was preaching at home at this point, and the hormones, they be kicking in. It was bad. 10 to 11 was just miserable for me. I'd just cry for no reason. Didn't know why, couldn't stop it, just uncontrollable sobbing. And it was another incident of that, and my mom took me downstairs and sat me down on her bed and got very serious, and she said, do you know why you're crying? And I was like, no. And she said, you know, when you disobey us, it's sin. When you fight with your sister, it's sin. And she went through several other things and told me how I was sinning, which of course really helped dry up my tears, obviously. And by the time she was done, I was just heaving and sobbing and just inconsolable. And I said, what do I need to do? And she said, you should be baptized. And I said, y'all said that I couldn't be. And she said, you need to go talk to Daddy. And so I went up to him, just, the kind of conversation. And he said, do you understand what sin is? And I was like, I don't know. And he got out the dry erase marker on the whiteboard and gave me this visual lesson about how sin separates us from God and that when I'm sinning, I'm separate from God, and baptism takes away the bridge so that I'm not separate from God anymore. And I was baptized in our bathtub, and I was tall and lanky, and my dad was incompetent and didn't fill the tub up enough. So he put my head under first and then was trying real hard to get the rest of me under, and had held me under for so long that my brain said, need air, and I popped up out of the water, and he said, you've got to let me finish. I said, okay. And he coached me through taking a couple of 3 more deep breaths, put me back under the water, and boom, I was a Christian. May 10th, 1998. And I thought I would feel different, and I didn't. And I felt still the weight of sin. And I look back now and I know the reason for that is because my parents had no idea how to forgive themselves or each other or anyone else. They are 2 people who needed more therapy than anyone I've ever met in my life, and who refused to go to therapy because they had decided it would keep them away from God, and that all they really needed to do was pray more and study more. And they projected their wounds and their pain onto everyone around them and hurt everyone around them because they wouldn't deal with their own wounds. And this is the thing that is funny to me about Mercury retrograde. Because I grew up hearing how psychiatry and psychology is a false religion and astrology is a false religion, and it just keeps you from taking accountability, and it pulls you away from God. But every psychiatrist and psychologist that I've been to has put the power strictly in my lap. Okay, you have this diagnosis. Well, this is what you do about that. You're struggling with these behaviors. This is what you do about that. It has never been an excuse, ever, at any point in my life. No diagnosis that I have ever received has been an excuse for behavior. Ever. I've never been told that by any mental health professional that I have seen. They have told me ways to cope with these symptoms and strategies to avoid the behaviors that are problematic. They have never said it's an excuse and you should tell people to just get over it, or that they should just forgive you. However, I have heard my dad, on more occasions than I could even count, use his diabetes as an excuse, use his high blood pressure as an excuse, use our behavior as an excuse for his bad behavior, and not apologize for it. But somehow I'm the one that's trying to avoid accountability. And I'm feeling very petty in saying all of this, which brings up another point, is that adolescents are some of the pettiest people you will ever meet, and that is both annoying and beautiful. And I think that as we are witnessing this collective wounding being displayed for us in the entirety of our society, what we're seeing is the pettiness of teenagers. You look at the online comments and the absolute illogical stupidity of some of them, the hatred behind them, the meanness behind them, the intentional wounding behind them. This is some teenage pettiness bullshit. And we're seeing this across the nation from fully grown adults. Because what they're doing is trying to heal that solar plexus adolescent development wound without even realizing it. They are feeling like 13-year-old kids getting bullied on the playground, and they are acting like 13-year-old kids, just handing back the bullying on the playground. And I think the more that we acknowledge that in ourselves and in others, the better able we will be to heal this gaping, hemorrhaging wound in our country. Because you look at the pettiness that is happening, we're just making enemies of each other. We're making enemies of each other for no reason. People who we should be friends with, people who we have a lot in common with, we're like, you're mean, you're meaner. And we can get into the deep philosophy of it and why they're doing what they're doing, but if you get down to the absolute core of the problem, the absolute core of the problem is these are hurting people who have developed or adopted philosophies that serve their wounds because they want to feel safe and they want to feel empowered. And you can call them awful and you can call them whatever that you want to call them. But they are scared people. And I am not talking about the elite in offices. I ain't worried about trying to heal Donald Trump or Elon Musk. They've got enough money they can pay for a psychiatrist if they actually give a fuck about healing, which neither one of them do, and that is very obvious. I am talking about your neighbors. I am talking about the people you interact with on a daily basis. I am talking about the people you're interacting with online, who are so fucking scared and feel so powerless that they want to act like a teenage bully because that's the only way that they can feel powerful. And it boils down to injustice. Because regardless of what your belief system is, there is huge injustices throughout this country on multiple levels, from the legal level to the financial level to the social level. The injustice that is pervasive throughout this country is so palpable that we don't even have to acknowledge it anymore. We know that there is injustice. Everyone. We don't even talk about it that much anymore. We're just like, yeah, everything's fucked up. People are treated like shit. That's America. And we want to rail against the injustices, as is normal, as we should. And in our adolescent mentality, we often don't understand who are the perpetrators of injustice. That's why you see such racism in this country and this call for deporting illegal immigrants and this hatred toward illegal immigrants, because a facet of people have identified them as the source of their injustice. It's not the source, but that's what they believe. That's who they believe to be the cause of their injustice. And I had my own kind of epiphany with this. I found my diary from when I was like 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. And the 12 to 13-year-old years, every single entry was about how my little sister was not doing her chores and it wasn't fair, and I was having to pick up her slack, and that wasn't fair. And nobody noticed that I was picking up her slack or that I was having to do her chores. And I didn't receive any recognition for picking up her slack and doing her chores. But if I fell behind on mine for one day, I got in trouble. But she never got in trouble. And I developed such a resentment toward her during that time. It was not to the point of hatred, but it was close. Because I was working so hard and I was trying to do what I was supposed to do, and I was having to pick up her slack without her receiving any kind of punishment or holding her accountable for it at all. But I would receive punishment if I fell behind just one day. And the injustice of that ate me alive. And I blamed her rather than the system, rather than my parents, who were completely unfair in how they were parenting and how they were holding us accountable. I blamed her instead of them. And I think this is what we see playing out in our society today. Rather than blaming those who are in charge of the system and enforcing the system, we blame the people who we can see right next to us. And I had another insight with that diary that's very poignant for the erasure that is happening in our society today, with not just the elimination of DEI efforts, but this erasure of our history, of eliminating anything that mentions Black or women or natives or anyone who's not a fucking white male. As I was flipping through my diary, I flipped to a page, and it was right before the point where I got caught in all of my rebellion and my dad beat me with a 2x6. And I saw the shreds of ripped out pages. I ripped out an entire year of my life. And I'd forgotten about that, but as I saw it, I remembered doing it, and it was very shortly after I got beat with a 2x6. And I wanted to erase that part of my life and pretend that it didn't happen and that I wasn't a bad person. And my very next entry, which was like 2 years later, said, I'm really glad that I'm not addicted to the computer anymore or some dumb show, because I was obsessed with the X-Files. That was my thing. That was like half of my personality. I loved the X-Files. And I gave away all of my X-Files stuff to a friend because I thought, this is keeping me away from God. And I wrote that in my diary, and I remember writing it and crying because I didn't believe a single word of that I wrote. I was trying to convince myself that I was so much happier wearing skirts and reading the Bible instead of indulging the things that I loved. And I erased everything that contradicted that because I couldn't deal with the reality of the situation. And I think this is the point that America is at, is that we're trying to erase everything that makes us uncomfortable because we just can't deal with the discomfort of acknowledging what we've done. That we were really bad for a long time, and we're not even that good now. But we did a lot of fucked up shit. We hurt a lot of people in our own country. And we can't deal with that. And so we just want to erase it. I want to circle back to the topic of pettiness because this is a subject that's been on my mind a lot lately. Is that we make enemies of each other when we shouldn't be. There are several women in my community who I should be allies with. And they have made themselves enemies of me for egotistical reasons. The majority of them was internalized misogyny and viewing a man as a resource rather than just a person. And because I got a specific man that they wanted, now I'm the enemy. But a lot of it is just the inability to put ego aside. And I think it's heartbreaking to see that, especially with women, because we have enough that we're fighting against. We shouldn't be fighting each other. We should be helping each other. We should be supporting each other. We should be holding each other up, and we're not. So, what can you do? I always say if you want to heal the world, you heal yourself. So, as you see these solar plexus issues, figure out your own and heal those, and then bring that out into the world. That's one way. But I think another way is that we just need to recognize the reality of what's going on. I've said it before, it's not left versus right, it's top versus down. That's partially true. But I think recognizing that we are in the individualistic versus collective cooperation fight is important. Because some people are never going to get on board and they're never going to believe you. My individual rights are more important than the collective. And they will not go out and live in the woods despite that mentality. But recognizing that we are fighting against an ideology that says it doesn't matter how much the collective is hurt based on my individual actions, I have the right to do whatever I want to do. Recognizing that mentality and addressing it from the standpoint of personal responsibility. Put the power in their hands. Okay, yeah. You have the right to do whatever you want to do. With great power comes great responsibility. If you're going to do whatever you want to do, you need to understand that what you are doing is affecting other people, and you need to own that responsibility. So what are you going to do about the repercussions of your actions? Make it that conversation. When you're dealing with someone who values their individual rights over collective cooperation, which is what we're talking about when we talk about DEI efforts, when we talk about national parks, when we talk about Social Security, when we talk about Medicare and Medicaid, and everything that we're dealing with right now with the stripping away of privileges and rights and help and support and structures, the educational system. This is the underlying issue. I have individual rights. Okay, so what are you going to do with those? You have a responsibility. Your individual rights have repercussions with the actions that you are taking. So how are you going to take responsibility for the repercussions of those actions? That needs to be the conversation. And it's not left versus right. It's not top versus down. It's a neighbor talking to a neighbor. Okay, you want to burn your whole yard down? You think that's a good idea? All right. Well, when you do that, you've set the whole fucking neighborhood on fire. Did you have a right to burn your yard? Sure. Your yard, do whatever you want with it, but you've affected other people now. You are hurting other people now. So how are you going to take accountability? Because you're responsible for the collateral damage of your individual actions. You say, it doesn't matter, I can do what I want. But you doing what you want hurt other people. And it expanded into infringing on other people's individual rights and property. So let's have a conversation about that. I hope this has served. As always, is my wish. And I hope that you will join me next week on the podcast as we both continue to work on our mosaic in progress. I love you all.